Hello, my name's Andy. Welcome to episode 9 of Keeping Water. In this episode I'm going to be looking at the pond related YouTube channels I watch most regularly and share a little bit about why I enjoy them. They're not in any particular order and there's a lot of channels I watch and enjoy that aren't included, but these are the ones that I've made the list. Just a quick note first, as I'm a bit confused about YouTube and copyright, so I've not included clips from each channel's videos. I could have approached each YouTuber and asked, but you know, work and time pressures. Also, I had originally planned to include about 20 channels in this video, but again, 4 12-hour days and a son off to uni and time didn't allow. I think 10 is probably best anyway. I've tried to include a range of different channels. These aren't necessarily the best ones, and I've wanted to include people who are basically experts and those channels that are at the early stage of their journey. For me, YouTube can provide both learning and enjoyment, and that's what I've tried to capture in this list. Anyway, on to the first pick, Righty. This is one of the first channels I began watching. I think I came across it when googling filters or DIY filters. Without doubt, he's one of the most proficient DIY filter makers I found on YouTube. Not only do his filters work effectively, but they look completely professional. In spite of my thoughts about making my own filters, I know I could never make half of his creations, and to be honest I don't watch with the objective of trying to do so, but I have developed a much better understanding of how filters work through his channel and seeing what is possible, at least with better engineering skills than I possess. His pond is mostly ground level, which obviously I'm a fan of. He has a lot of increasingly large koi. One of the things I've noticed over the last couple of years of watching his videos is how much they've grown. It's just as well, I think, that he's so skilled in making his own filtration, as the size and amount of fish he has really need it. Righty has quite a conversational style, but doesn't talk directly to camera. However, he's able to talk eloquently while he films, something I've not managed yet. Anyway, it's a cracking channel, as reflected in his deservedly high number of subscribers. Next, Country Koi Pond. This channel has a very relaxed, informal feel to it. If Righty is an afternoon science lesson with your favourite teacher, Country Koi Pond is Sunday early evening telly from the English countryside. I've watched as he self-built his pond, which from my perspective has become more and more impressive as time's gone by. My highlight is the window. I'm not a big fan of windows, but his is a narrow one which gives a glimpse into the fish's world without turning the pond too much into an outdoor fish tank. When thinking of how I was going to describe this channel, the phrase Heath Robinson kept popping up into my head, but that would be unfair. His construction is actually very efficient, neat and effective. I'm a fan of the titles too, and his dog. Next, the first of the Andys. There does seem to be a lot of pond YouTuber Andys. Anyway, Derby Koi is a newer channel, but is already growing quite quickly. Andy appears a very easy communicator who delivers information in a very positive way. There's clearly a lot of knowledge behind his videos, and in just over a month there's a lot of really helpful content for viewers. He also has a dog, who even gets a credit in the titles, and an end of video outtake section, which are all wins for me. On to Koi with Paul. Another newer channel, however Paul automatically gets a thumbs up from me with regular views of his dogs in the video, and also some very pleasingly symmetrical and neat pipework on his new build. My occasionally weird preferences aside, there's a lot of useful information to be gained from following his current build. I'd love to see more about his large well-stocked existing pond too. As Derby Koi does, Paul presents to camera, which is probably something I'll never do, so I also applaud him for that. Next, Cat and I Koi. There's no truth in me choosing this channel because they're fellow NHS workers, or because they've given me a shout out. What I like about the channel is the combination of instructional information, community integration, and informal humour and banter. They've many plans for developing their ponds, and it's going to be interesting to watch how they implement their engineering, creative and scientific knowledge into their future plans. Definitely a direct-to-camera presenting style, this time with two presenters, and they both appear relaxed and confident doing so. On to Devon Koi Pond. Devon Koi Pond is a prolific creator, while always managed to provide really interesting and useful information. He also has a very natural, informal presenting style, and has some lovely healthy fish. He's also really supportive of the community, supporting and advising other koi and pond keepers. Lots to gain here, especially about filters and water quality. James the Koi Whisperer. James is probably the most excitable and positive of pond YouTubers. He appears to work really hard at it and is always trying out new things. He does really well at direct-to-camera presenting. His pond is relatively small but has some large lovely fish, and he has hinted about a new build in the future which should be really interesting. The pond has a distinct style which is carried through the rest of the garden. James has an enthusiasm for getting stuff done and trying new things that's motivating to me when I'm feeling rather lazy. Next to a koi enthusiast. Such a lot of knowledge behind the many videos uploaded over the last 9 months. He also has some lovely fish in his pond and has used space creatively when building his filtration house. I think it's safe to say that I pick up something useful from every video, as well as info I squirrel away for the future. I also really like what he's done with an IBC tank that he's used as a grow on. The cladding and setup makes what can be quite an ugly tank into a positive aesthetic within the garden. The next Andy now, Koi Diaries. Koi Diaries are the epitome of the conversational style of videos. He has a very natural direct-to-camera style and appears very comfortable taking us with him on his weekly trials and successes. He will frequently apologise for his moaning, but his regular rants about the pond, himself, the weather, etc. are some of the highlights, to be honest. I'm not remotely knowledgeable about koi, but he clearly has some amazing fish in his pond, and has a microscopic, both figuratively and literally, attention to detail about them. For me, a regular Saturday morning cup of coffee and breakfast watch, and there's even a dog sometimes too. Cornish Koi, another very new channel following someone who by his own admission is learning as he goes, but when you see his pond build take shape and become really impressive, he's obviously quickly putting into practice what he's learnt. This has been one of the new channels that have been added to my regular viewing during lockdown, and it's a lot of fun watching the pond take shape, even if he did nearly kill himself at one point. He also mentioned my channel briefly, but as I've said, I'm not so shallow as to be influenced by that. Anyway, that's my list. There's loads of other great channels out there, and I basically watch most of them every week. YouTube is a font of knowledge, and my pond would never have been built without it, or continue to be improved. I think I'll make a part 2 to this video, showing some of the other channels that I watch and that I've not been able to include this time. My thoughts this week have turned to the plants. Moving into autumn, they're going to need some work before winter. The iris will mostly die back over winter, and I'll need to remove the stalks as they turn brown. As you can see though, not many are turning brown so far. I'm not very knowledgeable about plants, but the advice I've had is to cut it back in the autumn to just about water level and remove dead or dying stalks. There's also advice to thin them out, but I like them thicker as a heron barrier. Which brings me to my first issue. I've not actually cut them back before, they've usually died back themselves, and additionally I'm worried about cutting them too low as it will make it easier for the herons. Anyway, I'm also going to be trimming back the grass plants, sorry I don't know their proper name. I'm going to leave some as cover for the fish, but will be giving them a reasonably significant trim. It helps with getting the leaves out of them in autumn and making sure there are no dead or dying stems underneath the mess of plant growth. This will also give more access to herons, so coupled with the iris issue, I'm going to need to improve the netting around the pond and make sure it's robust enough to make access difficult for them. I also need to sort the planting in the walled area. A lot of it is dead and dying and not particularly attractive, which brings me nicely to my next issue. It's pretty difficult to work on any of the plants effectively from the side of the pond, but especially those in the walled area, so I'm going to have to get the wetsuit on and work on it from within the pond. All of this will be in an episode coming up in the next few weeks. While inspecting the plants this week, I noticed that the small amount of string algae that had been living its life by the filter outlet had grown quite a bit longer. There wasn't too much algae growing in the plant baskets, which is where it often develops, but the algae on the sides of the pond had also thickened, so I thought I'd treat it all before it got worse. I use Clearwater's blanket weed treatment to treat algae problems. I usually only treat at about 60% of recommended dose, as this seems enough. This week though, I only had about 40% left, so we'll see how well it works. I discovered that I only needed about 60% dose when returning from holiday to find an algae bloom, and I only had that much available. Well, it worked, and I've only ever used that dose since. I usually pour it around the pond, but as it was only a small amount, I concentrated the mixture where the worst of the algae was, and anyway, it was in the flow from the outlet, so it would be mixed throughout the pond. Also this week, I did this, which does make some sense, honestly. With the treatment in the pond, it was a little cloudy, so I chose to do some surface filming. I got some good footage, which will be included more fully at some point, although using a selfie stick, net handle, footstool, cable ties and a clamp definitely means I win the Heath Robinson Award this week. I'll do an episode in the future about filming in and around the pond and the slightly unnecessary choices I make. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Keeping Water. Please think about subscribing and give this episode a like if you've enjoyed it. Next week I'm going to be netting the fish to complete pre-winter checks and measures. If all goes well, that will be the topic for the next episode. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.